Watch out. Now these are my memories from around 1925. When the family moved from Dorset to Pen Harbour, my sister and I went to Sayers Common School. The infants being taught by Miss Stallen, who later married Mr. Parry, one of the local policemen. The local schools in that district were invited by Mr. Gordon Tully to his Christmas party, which was held at the Drill Hall in Hurst every year. The children being collected by the delivery vans of local tradespeople, ours being Prince's Stores, being collected in the afternoon, sitting on forms in the rear of the vehicle and taken to the drill hall and returned later that evening to our doorstep. This was carried on until the early 30s, when we were taken then to the pantomime on the Palace Pier, Brighton. Later, when the family moved to Hurst, I was between the ages of 7 and 14, I attended Hurstby Point School. The headmaster was Mr. Schofield, affectionately known as Old Scoey. His youngest son is Paul Schofield, the Shakespearean actor. The school was the south half of the building, the centre of the school's caretaker's accommodation, the north half being a girls' school. The boys' half consisted of one large and two smaller rooms. The larger room had a screen across to form a smaller room for the infants class, under Miss Evans, who also played the piano at assembly. The larger part being the top class room under the headmaster. This class in later years was furnished with double chair, desks and chairs. It also contained an open fireplace which was lit only in the very cold weather. On the front wall of the classroom hung a photo-framed list of periods. Scoey would stand in front and study this list, but in fact he was watching the class in reflection, and somebody would hear that head call out, "Fetch my stick!" And woe betide, you've got his stick and across your bum. A second fireplace was in the woodwork room, which in my recollection was used only for woodwork and the yearly visit of the school doctor. The building had two entrances, one at the front with rows of hats and coat hooks, and one at the rear. This did have a toilet bowl and running water, in which every Friday all ink wells would be washed out, cleaned, refilled, ready for the following week. I seem to remember seeing a hand towel from time to time, rather blue, but still it acted as a means of drying one's hands. On a Friday there would be one or two gamekeepers waiting to enlist the boys for beating the following day. This job was keenly sought as it paid pocket money and a rabbit for the family. For 2 or 3 months during the summer we had two boys join the school who came from Danny House. I think their parents had something to do with the Dutch embassy. Their name was Sisarge. Although I hated school, I had a respect for Scoey. I always thought he received the thin end of the wedge when the school was altered and the boys had to remain and work amongst the builder's rubble, noise and dust. The girls moved to alternative accommodation, such as the parish room. The girls had an additional classroom which was used for domestic science. The boys had allotments at West Town. These are now under part of Western Road and the adjoining garage and forecourt. The girls played stool ball in the recreation ground. The boys had to play football either at Baker's Farm at Washbrooks or at College Lane. They did not have a cricket pitch. In front of the caretaker's house was an iron fence enclosing a garden. In this garden on Empire Day, the whole school, both boys and girls, would assemble and sing patriotic songs and hymns under the direction of Miss Bessie Dunstan, the girls' music teacher. I can see her now tapping her tuning fork. To end the ceremony, a talk would be given by Colonel Bill Campion from Danny, who had been Governor of Western Australia. Okay. During the summer, another Saturday job offered by farmers was stone picking. Not many offers for this. It was back-breaking hard work. You took your own bucket, and if it was flints that we were picking up, the bottom of the bucket would be full of holes before the farmer would pay you and let you go. Potato picking was also a hard job. Not only did you have to pick up the spuds, but dig out any that just below the surface and fill the sacks. More permanent Saturday work was available, such as delivery boys. My first was for Laker the Butcher next to Bellevue School at the top of Cookfield Road. The second was for Baker the Butcher in the High Street. The shop, which had a pair of horns on the keystone over the entrance to the slaughterhouse, has now been removed. Action with Hurst Church was as a choir boy. Choir practice was Thursday evening with the choir master, Mr. Shepherd, pay being 10 shillings per 6 months. It has been known that after the choir practice, some of the lads would go down to the southern boundary which adjoins Policeman's Lane. This boundary is a very high wall which retains the churchyard to the north and gives an ideal spot to look over and see what was going on below, maybe a couple or two. The old reeves as crowns, no reports of crowning have yet been notified. After my voice broke, I joined the tower as a bell ringer and was trained by Mr. Jennings, the church warden. And now the bell ringers, after ringing down, would amble across from the tower, across the road, and wait outside the Red Lion for the landlord to open. In the High Street we had a fire station, telephone exchange, joinery works at the rear of the watchmakers, Walger's wheelwrights and blacksmiths, Allen's blacksmiths in Pit Lane, the rectory, the bathhouse next to the cabin, Stringer's builder's yard opposite the Oak, and King's joinery workshops. In Western Road we had the Chinese Pleasure Gardens boating lake, which also had a cinema attached to it, a corn mill and gasworks. Western Road ended at its junction with Cookfield Road, which was known as White's Corner, taken from the name of the little sweet shop in the point of the road. This point had on the garden side a brick-built toilet which had the postbox built into the rear wall, so we all knew where the mail went. In Cookfield Road we had Coachman's Brewery, part of which was used as a soup kitchen during the Depression. The boys collected the lemonade bottles which had glass marble in the necks. These were known as couches when playing marbles. The Lamb Inn, where Mr. Cragg was the landlord, ran his carrier business. We had two schools, the local and the private Bellevue. At the bottom, opposite the Catholic Church, was a field where once a year a travelling missionary would pitch camp. This field went down as far as White's Corner and is an area where children would gather. Mr. Hender, who farmed at Little Park Farm and Hydes, was very good to the local children and had a proper stile erected and allowed them to use that part of the field as a recreation ground. Further down the road at the council yard was the entrance to the incinerator, and in the field adjoining the brook was the slaughterhouse. Leading off Cookfield Road was Manor Road, in which there was a police station, Starley's nurseries and clubs. Further up the road opposite the school in Bricklayers Square, which contains a row of cottages, had a dairy on the corner. In South Avenue, off the High Street, is one way to the recreation ground, where the gun from the Great War used to stand facing over Snashel's allotment. The Campion family from Danny Park allowed the general public to roam beyond the many footpaths which crossed the estate. The two local cricket teams had a permanent pitch in the park also. The local scout troop had a permanent summer campsite. A lot of guide companies from Brighton used the park also. The scout troop had its winter quarters in the old coach house and stables at the rear of the War Memorial. The guides met at the Grange along Elburn Road opposite West Town allotments. During the winter, skating was allowed on the lake. When dark, cars' headlights would be used to light the area. Once again, the name of Gordon Tully comes up. Gordon Tully organised the carnival, the proceeds going to the Royal Sussex Hospital. This was such a success, he was made a governor. It was held on a Saturday in August. There would be a fair in the recreation ground, fancy dress parades, dressed floats, long processions around streets, sports events. Reigate Police always sent a tug-of-war team and was a great attraction. In the evening it was impossible for a vehicle to pass through the High Street because of the merry-making at the New Inn, both inside and out. At one time the college had peacocks roaming around the grounds. They would be very noisy at night. When the school was opened at 10 p.m, a member of the OTC band would sound lights out. At Christmas, the school put on a Shakespeare play, which would be presented on the last day of term to the parents. The night before, a dress rehearsal would take place, to which the local people were invited. These plays were so popular that tickets had to be obtained quite early. Following the play, the traditional Boar's Head feast was carried out. The college employed a number of female staff from the north of England. Many of these girls married local lads and still remain in the village. It was a tradition that before Easter we would go up on the hills and set fire to the grass. The reason being the grass would burn and young tender grass would come through ready for sledging on Good Friday, which all the children used to do. We would drag our sledges up to Wolstonbury and sledge down the face or down Table Mount, again come home smothered in soot from the burnt grass. However, we'd be dead tired by the time we got home. North of Little Park Farm were three woods, which were known as the Wilderness, the Big Wood and the Little Wood. And in the summer, one could lie in bed and hear the nightingales in the Little Wood for hours. It was a lovely sound. Hender did not encourage the boys in the woods, but he didn't mind them. That you'd get a ticking off if caught. He had a gamekeeper whose name was Mr. Coote. And if we were in the woods and we saw Mr. Coote, it would be Cootie Scoot, and away we went. Another memory I have is of on the morning of the ploughing match, to hear in the far distance the tinkle of the bells of the horses' harness, and we would go outside and watch them go by on their way to the ploughing match with their wagons freshly painted, their ploughs freshly painted, and the horses with all their finery on, and the ploughman with his whip, one furrow for every year. A great sight. Before I started work, my visits to Alban would have been to watch the old crocks, Alban Fair, or a ploughing match if in that area. My ambition had always been to work with timber. My first job was in Sadler's wheelwright shop. At this establishment all the work was for Sydney Hole or Holes and David-Door dairies. They built and repaired Sussex wagons, tip carts and conversions. One wagon was known as a winkle barge. A conversion that was often carried out was to strip a tip cart down to its main frame and mount a huge pork barrel. These were used as water carts or slush carts. When the barrels came, we obtained about 10 buckets of boiling water from the dairy and poured into each one, sealed and left for a month or two. The contents, when opened, were bottled and put aside. To prove how good it was, we had a kitten which was poorly, so gave it a measure or two in its milk. Poor little devil, it ran about drunk all day. The workshop was at the rear of the farm, Alban Green. Also in this area, Mr. Bowles also had a wheelwrights and blacksmith shop next door to the local post office, owned by Miss Scarterfield. After Christmas, if she had any cakes left over, one of the lads would raffle them for her. So